welcome to the Enterprise. This is my crew on the deck.
Yes.
And we are back for another wonderful episode, but this time we're going to be talking about something that's kind of serious, which is science fiction and why it doesn't seem to be doing well in Hollywood. But before we get there, I want everybody to quickly introduce themselves and where they can be found on social media. And we're going to take it to Kay, who is our guest host for the week because Leo is out and he is at Science. I was going to say he's at Science Fiction by Southwest. He's at South by Southwest.
That sounds interesting.
Yeah,
That
could be
South
a
by
new
Southwest.
festival.
Yeah,
I would go.
Interesting new festival.
South by Southwest.
Oh, yeah.
So, Kay, where can people find you? And
Hey, so Kayb here. You can find me on the internet, Twitter and Instagram, Lady Kayb 21.
Vincent Sang, you can find me on Facebook. My handle on Instagram is InTheMoment47. I also have a handle on Twitter, The Review Machine.
My name's Justin. You can find me on Instagram. It's KaiserLeo83, and you can find me on Twitter at TheDashboard83.
fantastic.
Badass names.
And you can find me at Valerie Complex on Twitter, which is at VALERIE Complex, and Valerie_Complex on Instagram. And that's it. You cannot follow me on Facebook because that's personal. So let's just get right into it because it really got me thinking about science fiction and why it doesn't do well when Blade Runner 2049 came out and just tanked at the box office. Understandably, the first one tanked as well. The first Blade Runner didn't do well, but science fiction was handled differently back then because Alien was also popular, Terminator was popular, so science fiction was just popping off. But science fiction hasn't really done well in Hollywood for the past 5 to 7 years. And then you look at the films that have followed afterward with Annihilation not doing well, Cloverfield Paradox going straight to Netflix. Anything else that you can think of that's been science fiction that has done well? Passengers didn't do well.
No, that was a bad movie.
Well, yes, it was bad. But
Gosh, I forgot about Passengers.
In general,
No, honestly.
sci-fi films haven't. It depends on the film. I think if you're not a big franchise, unfortunately, a lot of those smaller or indie sci-fi films tend to struggle. Particularly, I was also reminded with Annihilation, Ex Machina. I don't think. I mean, it gained a following, but I don't think it made that much.
I mean, it
It
wasn't huge.
It wasn't huge, but it was actually done on a small budget and it was sort of critically accepted by the masses. So that was more of an outlier. And I feel like indie science fiction has been doing a little bit better, probably because it's cheaper and word of mouth
It could be that.
spreads.
When you aim small, you miss small. Like so, like I think like
low.
like when the sci-fi has a low budget, it tends to do a little better. But like the problem with sci-fi by its very nature is a lot of them tend to need a larger budget.
Yeah.
And Western audiences, it just doesn't resonate with them as much as other genres like fantasy. We love fantasy over here, but like science fiction, I don't know. It's just like when you look at movies that like even good ones like Edge of Tomorrow, where I also feel like part of it was the name was really bad. Like they marketed that movie really wrong. But
It's a marketing issue.
yeah, like it's funny how they didn't realize that the name that their tagline for the movie "Live, Die, Repeat" was a better name for it until it was on DVD. But this is a movie that's actually really good, and it needed overseas sales to even see a profit. And I wish I could explain why science fiction doesn't particularly do well in America. Some say because American audiences aren't smart enough to get it, but I don't necessarily think that's the case. I think it's just that the theme science fiction tends to explore. Like I think those tend to like turn people off because science fiction tends to have very kind of somber.
I was going to say dark.
Yeah, it has very dark. Science fiction always kind of veers dark, and I think people like would prefer fantasy because fantasy is a way to kind of escape our nature, our inner nature, and science fiction.
But science fiction is touching on what's going to eventually happen for a lot of people. Like, in a lot of people's minds, they're like, we will obliterate the human race. Science fiction. Yes, every time.
So what do you think, Kay? Like, what do you think are some of the reasons why it may not be doing well, as opposed to some that have done well, like Inception or like Interstellar, that have done fairly well recently? What's your take on it?
I don't know that I would necessarily put Inception in the science fiction bucket to a degree. Inception kind of is its own little mashup of a lot of different things.
Inception's more of a heist thing.
Yeah. I mean, it's just very different, like in terms of genre. I don't know. I can't even really put my finger on it, but Christopher Nolan created something incredible. But I think Interstellar had, like, I hate to say it, but Interstellar had a lot of the star power backing it up. So I think people were initially intrigued because they were like, oh, Matthew McConaughey. They were like, oh, he's in it, so like, let's just see what's gonna happen. And so Interstellar wasn't a bad film. I mean, it was a pretty decent film, but I think it had that star power. And to your point, I think a lot of times sci-fi aims low. I will say though, with Cloverfield Paradox, like, they had a lot of big name people in the film. They actually had a really good cast. Like a lot of the actors, I was like, oh, I actually like 90% of these people as actors, but unfortunately they just weren't given a strong script. And maybe that goes to aiming low. You know, like I don't know, but I just feel like, listen, if you're gonna make a great sci-fi film, you can't just have star power, but you actually have to have great writers. And so I think that tends to be a little bit of a struggle with some of the sci-fi films that are happening right now.
That's really a great point, because that speaks to why films like Ex Machina have a following and did fairly well, because it didn't have the star power, but it had a great sort of feminist story that people resonated with, and it did pretty well.
You have to have both.
I think I want to touch upon something. I feel like a lot of the films that do fail tend to probably be alienating for a lot of people. And I think they would like to have something, not just with science fiction, but fantasy as well, and maybe crime drama, that's very relatable. They want something they can tangibly not only see, but pretty much can connect with. And
why did,
sometimes certain films may have a hard time doing that.
But it's like you said, I mean, it's like you said, they're too somber. Like sometimes the subject matter really is just, they're like, wow, I didn't watch this film, so I could be reminded then the next 50 years we're not going to be here. Maybe 25 on a good day.
Well, when you say science fiction and fantasy, why do you think films like Annihilation didn't do as well as it could have? Because it seemed like this was a combination of both, right?
Yeah, it's a combination of both, and then of course the marketing was the problem with that film. You can honestly tell that the marketing team really had a hard time nailing down what that film is. The way I view it is basically survivalist drama with sci-fi elements that ramp up, and it basically becomes more of a survival horror film with that big sci-fi element that basically drives it into something very unique, at least from my personal takeaway from it. And I think it comes down to the marketing team and the studios, who basically want to portray the film in a certain way, but the problem is they don't know if they have to market it this way or that way. They just kind of go off what is the basic, emotion or the basic form of like grabbing the audience's attention, and sometimes that doesn't really get to what the film is all about. And even Blade Runner had that problem too, particularly 2049. They were trying to advertise it as this like crime thriller, and it was so much more than that. It was more of a film noir mystery when you really think about it. And it just comes down to marketing and the studio's interest to really make this film pop out to them. And sometimes, unfortunately, they just either don't get it, or they just unfortunately just let it go out there and suffer probably a slow death.
I'm curious if anyone screened this though, for like, because a lot of times, like I know people didn't see Annihilation because they didn't understand what it was about. So they were like, I'm not really interested in taking the risk because I don't know what this film is about.
Yeah, it did screen.
And I think because of the like you said, the marketing aspects, like they didn't really know where to land. That made it a little bit more challenging for people to want to go see the film, because a lot of people were like, what is this? Like,
But I think oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, it's interesting. I think the thing that scares, really what scares people away from science fiction is not the fiction part as much as it is the science part. And I know that as somebody who reads science fiction literature, I love them, but like I know that one of my favorite authors, he has this habit of like, he'll have like this 25-page chapter, and at least half of that chapter is just dedicated to explaining what the planet is like, the geography, and I think that turns people off, because it's like, yeah, but get to the part where the space cop chases the criminal. And I think when you look at movies like you mentioned Inception, and I think the Inception does technically qualify as a science fiction film because its premise is built in a near future world using future science, but the science fiction is addressing. It's just kind of the backdrop to allow these characters to do cool special effects stuff, like running in a spinning room that looks like anti-gravity and stuff like that. And so that's what people want to see. But when you have movies that are very meditative, I think that speaks to a very certain kind of audience. And the average audience goer, they don't want their science fiction to be meditative, unless you market it as such. Because let's look at Arrival. Arrival actually did pretty well.
Yeah,
but
that's a good one.
I think one of the things that hurts sci-fi is the marketing.
Yep,
because these
absolutely.
studios are terrified that the audience might not get the movie, they mismarket it. Arrival is one of those movies that they marketed it as an intellect. This is a smart science fiction film. This is a movie where they tackled an alien invasion from what happens with, forget about the lasers and guns, how do you talk to them?
Right.
Communication.
And it didn't mislead you. It told you exactly what this was, and people appreciated that. And they were like,
That's true.
it let people decide for themselves the kind of movie they want to see.
Right.
But a lot of movies, they'll like with Annihilation, they overemphasize the action. And they're like maybe 2 action sequences in that movie.
I remember when I was living in Sacramento, I think with the winter of 2016, they had screened Annihilation for fans, for movie fans, and one of the complaints, I guess, was that it was too intellectual. So they may have changed the marketing based on what they heard at these pre-screenings, because it's possible Annihilation could have been something completely different if it wasn't so cerebral or whatever people were saying. And so I think they wanted. One of the complaints, it seems like, based on the marketing, was that there wasn't enough action. So then they put up this poster with 5 women with AR-15s and military gear.
They're like, it's going to be an action film.
It's gonna be like that. Those kinds of little things didn't connect. And when you have a bunch of little things, then the bigger things sort of start to become glaringly obvious. And I'll explain more about that later, because spoilers. But to get into the next point, it's like, so Arrival is something that's connecting with people because it's not, telling lies. But so how do they bridge the gap? How does Hollywood do better to market these? Are they going to ever do better, or is science fiction going the way of the Western?
I would say I can kind of see that for films, but I know TV, that's where it's flourishing for science fiction. And I feel like executives really need to take a look at the way they're advertising the shows, like, of course, Black Mirror and Westworld, that's true. And I would also mention Philip K. Dick's Electric Dreams from Amazon. And maybe they should really take a look at those, see how they're advertising it, and they're not trying to mislead them and say, it's going to have action stuff. No, they're advertising these as mainly anthology stories, but anthology stories that explore a certain theme, a certain idea, and that's something that marketing teams are
I think you're
not
right.
really getting in films.
I think you're right, and I think like that goes with one of the things I was saying. Like they get, it's not the fiction part that people are hung up on; it's the science, and these stories need to find a balance between the science that they're trying to explore and the stories. People want something that they can relate to. They want to be able to, like, one of the things that people like about Black Mirror is not necessarily the sci-fi of Black Mirror. It's what this technology does to the people that are using it. It's relatable. It's people like, oh man, that's crazy. Like, because you can project yourself onto that. But when you have a story that gets caught up, like, I love Blade Runner 2049, but like, I will admit that when you have like 5 to 6 minutes of sweeping shots of this city to a very loud synthy soundtrack, I'm like, audiences are gonna be like, so are these guys gonna, get to the detective part anytime soon? So it's like I said, the authors of the screenwriters, they love this. They clearly love this stuff, but you have to remember who your audience. Like, remember to bring this back to the characters. Remember to make this make the story human. Like, yes, you can have aliens and robots in your world, but remember that it's humans who are watching your movie, and they have to be able to connect to it. And like, I think they need to look at the sci-fi television and they need to copy how they're doing it. Cause
I think that's a good point, because that's what I was saying earlier. Again, a perfect cocktail of a great script and then having the star power to back it up. And so, like you said, making sure that the human being aspect is not lost, because again, people are looking at this film like, okay, this is great and all, but I can't relate to it. So then you're bored, and then you're like, what is this? Which I think was part of the issue with Annihilation, is that even before people were watching the trailer and they were kind of like, I'm already bored, why would I spend money to go see it? But the trailer didn't accurately reflect what the film was really about. So I think, too, that plays into marketing as well, making sure that your trailers actually reflect what the film is about, just like Arrival, so that way you know exactly what you're getting yourself into. That's another way to help as well.
Yeah.
I think I'm just in agreement with everybody. Marketing is always huge. Marketing is one of the reasons why a lot of these video game and anime Hollywood adaptations don't do well, because they're marketed poorly. But it's also the reason why a lot of films just don't do well, because of poor marketing. And if you can't grab people with your marketing, then you're screwed. Forget it. Anyway, thank you for tuning into this episode and this discussion on science fiction and whether or not Hollywood is going to get it together on that. And it seems like Netflix is the savior. Netflix is here to save science fiction.
Amazon and
control.
Hulu as
Creative
well.
control.
All the streaming services are here to save it. So
Don't tell
let
Hollywood that.
Let us know what
Oh,
you
yeah.
think. Leave a comment below. Let us know where you think science fiction is headed within the next year or two in Hollywood. And again, thank you for tuning in. See you next time.